Hello and welcome to video 3, which is the update for the end of April 2021. So this is going to be a bit of about the vaccine and an update. So just to remember what we're talking about, the purpose of vaccination is to initiate our adaptive immune response. And so we want to be able to initiate this B cells and these T cells to inhibit a virus's ability to bind our cells and replicate. And the good news is for better or for worse, that in approximately 20%, not a minor, not an insignificant proportion of people, they actually don't show symptoms of getting COVID, that their immune system is sufficient to clear the virus without causing sufficient disease. And overall, again, what the purpose of vaccination is take the ability of a person to being infected and blocking it so that a person doesn't get sick, and even more importantly, hopefully that person can't spread the disease to other individuals. So again, not going in all into the specifics, but how do we generate immunity? What happens? We have these cells called dendritic cells, and of course there's actually different types of dendritic cells, and it's far more complicated than I'm going to make it sound. But what they need to do is alert the adaptive immune cells. They need to tell B cells and T cells, hey, I've got something that we need to respond to. So antigen presenting cells, or APCs, they act like sentinels of the immune system, going around circulating the body looking for things to have to alert the immune system to. So then we think about how are the different vaccines different. So I'm going to do a little bit of an analogy here, where say we have a picture of your family and you want to share that family with your mother or your grandma, depending on what generation you're pretending to be in this story. But you want to get that picture to grandma to activate joy. Now, if you have a physical picture of your family, you might decide you're going to walk it over to your grandmother's house and just physically give it to her. Or maybe that same picture you realize it's raining, I don't want to walk, it's far, I'm going to just put it in the mail. I'm going to put it in an envelope and gonna let the postal service deliver it. Or maybe you realize it's this picture, but instead of physically mailing that specific picture to grandma, I am just going to email a file, a computer file of that. And then grandma at her house, she can either print it or she can download it to her computer or to her phone. So we have this little analogy of getting this picture to grandma's house to activate her joy and share that picture. That's essentially the same thing that we're doing for the vaccine. We have a spike protein, so it's a particular protein on the virus that we want to generate this immune response to. So we want to get this protein to the dendritic cells so that they can initiate an immune response to activate that adaptive immune response and ultimately prevent infection. So what makes different vaccines different? It's how they're getting this protein to that dendritic cell. So they can either physically give the protein, we're going to see they could put it in a virus, we're going to see they can put it in mRNA. So we're going to talk just a little bit about these different vaccines. So there's a lot of different vaccines and throughout history that have tried these different approaches to getting that protein or the particular protein of interest for a virus to a dendritic cell. So different options that exist. You can have viruses that are their own vaccines, that you weaken a virus or you inactivate it. And these are actually common vaccines that we have. So the MMR vaccine, or the original vaccine essentially to smallpox, these are examples of weakened viruses, where it actually is a live replicating virus. Or there's other inactivated viruses so that the virus is no longer able to replicate in any way, but is still actually physically that virus component. And if you think about initiating an immune response, viruses are very good at this, so this makes good sense why we're able to initiate a strong immune response to virus vaccines. The other most common vaccines are these protein-based vaccines, where you literally are giving the protein in a little mixture that activates those dendritic cells even more so to make a response. Now, the exciting fun things are the vaccines that are currently out on the market, which are these RNA vaccines. Now, RNA, as you remember, hopefully, is that transition. Remember we talked all about DNA and protein and RNA serving as that messenger, taking that copy and being the physical transcript from which to make those amino acids and those proteins. Well, that's what an mRNA vaccine is. An mRNA vaccine is an RNA vaccine is using that RNA. So instead of getting the cell proteins, you're giving it that RNA to then actually just make the protein. And this is what these Pfizer and Moderna vaccines that I'm going to mention in a second are an example of. The other exciting new way to get that protein to those dendritic cells are using what we call viral vector vaccines. So you're not using the virus itself in some sort of attenuated way, but rather you're using this sort of carrier virus. You can think about these viral vector vaccines as using a virus to act like a shuttle to get that gene into the cell. So it's using more of the nucleotides to get the cell itself to express the protein and to then generate an immune response. And it's using this little virus as sort of the Trojan horse to get it into the cell. And so these Johnson & Johnsons are actually an example of this non-replicating viral vectors using adenovirus as the carrier. So in the United States currently, you are currently eligible to receive a COVID vaccine at no cost to you. There are 3 vaccines that are currently approved under emergency use. And that is, again, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. Those are those mRNA vaccines, or there's this Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So the 2 mRNA vaccines, you need to get 2 shots, and the Johnson & Johnson, you just need to get 1. All of these vaccines have been well studied so that they're safe and effective, and they reduce your chance of getting severe illness. So vaccine safety. So something that I was actually a little surprised about and pleasantly surprised was how quickly we were able to get these vaccines authorized and approved. And that's because of something that I had previously been reminded about when we had the Ebola scare and the speed at which the Ebola vaccines came out, is to remind myself that pandemics speed up vaccine development. So the whole thing about why vaccines take so long is you have to wait for people to get infected or with whatever the infection is. So my entire 5 years in graduate school, when I was getting my PhD, I knew people who were working on the same influenza vaccine, and they had been working on it for several years just because it took a long time for those low probability that someone in their study got flu. Whereas in a pandemic, when so many people are getting infected, it's actually quite easy for events or for people to be getting infected and get that data in much faster. So the good news is there weren't corners cut in terms of what had to be evaluated. It was just the speed at which those results came out were sped up because we were in a pandemic and there were a lot of people getting infected. So these vaccines have been approved by the FDA. However, there have been some issues with blood clots, but having these be very low probability events. And so for a brief while, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was put on hold to make sure the scientists got the data to determine just how risky things were. And with this, we sort of need to remind ourselves of those issues of risks and what may seem like very frightening events, and what statistically makes more sense to be scared of. So I know a lot of people who are actually quite scared of flying, and they would much prefer to drive. And the fact that you tell someone, the probability of being in a car accident, and anyone who knows someone who's been seriously injured or killed in a vehicle accident knows just how dangerous cars are, and versus the likelihood of being in an airplane crash, and how fearful people often are of airplanes. So there certainly has been seen now that we are seeing these slight increased chance of getting blood clots, and just from the mRNA vaccine, so not the Johnson & Johnson that was paused, it looks like there's about a 4 in a million chance. But even that, if there's a very low probability chance of something, but when you're talking about the entire population, that still is almost 1,000 people. So you can't discount the fact that it does exist, that there is someone that may have a negative reaction. It's very improbable, but that doesn't mean it does not ever happen. And that's what really is coming out, that there's these low probability blood clots that are found, 15 confirmed cases in a small group of women. So it is something to know about. But again, we need to remind ourselves that the risk of having a blood clot from COVID is much, much greater than either of those probabilities. So that really these vaccines have been established to be the safe choice to best protect ourselves from COVID-19. And this is particularly important because we can see, if we look back to the leading causes of death in 2019, way back then, heart disease and cancer were by far the number 1 and number 2 causes of death, with almost, with over 650,000 people dying of heart disease and almost 600,000 to cancer. And there's always a large percentage of individuals who die each year from influenza and respiratory diseases. And then it's also important to note the high percentage of people who actually self-harm. And just a little shout out to remind all students that there is actually counseling available for students through our counseling department, and coordinating students to get services through the community. So just to remind everyone the importance of mental health as well. But the sad fact is starting last year, we now had COVID as the 3rd leading cause of death, with over 300,000 Americans dying from COVID. And while our numbers are starting to look quite good in the United States in terms of getting our pandemic under control, that is not the case around the world. Tragically, as I record this in the end of April, India's numbers are just horrifying right now. And so we can never think about the cases of just what's happening where we currently are. We have to think about the whole wide world, because if the virus is replicating anywhere in the world, there is an opportunity for that sequence to change. So just like we talked all about mutations during week 11 and 12, and thinking about how our DNA can change, in this case, it's not DNA that's changing, it's RNA, because it's an RNA virus. But they can have mutations, and there can be these variants that have their proteins that are slightly different. We talked about those different types of mutations, where you can have a silent mutation or a missense mutation. But what happens is those can change the shape of those proteins. And this is extremely problematic in the sense of our immune systems, that we talk all about how proteins fit and look with their shape. If you change it, you can change and you can lose that previously acquired immune response that was unique to that shape. So you want to just be thinking about that in terms of how we as a globe need to be dealing with human pathogens. So lastly, again, great news though for you as a human being taking this course. You are currently eligible to receive a COVID-19 vaccine at no cost to you. It used to be quite difficult to get an appointment, but for better or for worse, yay, that is no longer the case. And so if you have questions about the vaccine, or you'd like to hear more specifics, please let me know. I'm more than happy to talk through what we know about the science, and what has been established and what hasn't been established yet. And if you need any help actually physically registering for the vaccine, also let me know. You can use these links, but I would encourage everyone to do so. And with that, I wish everyone well.